Welcome to Assembly Calendar. I'm Ted Flint. With us today, Assemblyman Anthony Palumbo, who serves the 2nd Assembly District, which includes Suffolk County. Assemblyman Palumbo, good to see you again.
Thank you. Good to be back.
Well, we are in the middle of May, but the state budget was recently adopted. That's the big issue here, the big news until April 1, whether the budget gets adopted on time or not, and usually it does. Last 4 years it has. What is an on-time, but what does the budget mean for your district overall? How did you fare?
You know, this is my first budget, being new to the Assembly. Was happy to be a part of it. And the nice aspects of the learning process are it is very similar to the practice of law, which I've been doing, of course, for 16 years.
Ex-prosecutor.
So, that's right. And there's a lot of negotiations that take place in the hallway, so to speak. And it turned out very nicely for the 2nd Assembly District. Most importantly, we were able to secure an additional amount of funds, $5 million into the district that would go specific to a sewage treatment plant in Calverton in the town of Riverhead, but more importantly, the school aid. And that's really the main issue that I've always been very concerned with. And the reason why I got into politics at all is because of our fair share of school aid is what we really need to stay focused on, that we're taxed exorbitantly on Long Island and in the district. So it's taxes. 2/3 of our bill is school tax. So with that in mind, the governor's original proposal had 3.9% across the board for the state. And after significant negotiations, and as I mentioned, we're calling it horse trading, but to be a little flip about it, but ultimately we're able to get that budget up to 5.9 statewide, but more importantly in my district, we had an increase of 7.79% over last year, so over $13 million additional funding to our district, which is really, it's wonderful. And that is directly, every dollar we get in school aid is a dollar back in the homeowner's pocket. So that is a very large victory when it comes to the budget. And of course, the budget is a mixed bag, as I'm sure many of the viewers understand, that the mixed aspect of an omnibus bill is we have anything from veterans' rights to environmental conservation to school aid all in one bill. And you vote yes on it all or no on it all. There's no line item veto, so to speak. So sometimes there are a few things in the budget that may not thrill you, but in this particular budget, generally speaking, it was very good for my district.
So you got $13 million, your district, $13 million on top of last year's budget?
That's correct. That's correct.
And $5 million more than originally proposed for this year. Is that?
That's correct. And actually, it was I believe it was a little more than probably about $8 million more than was originally proposed. And we were also able to secure additional funding for the gap elimination adjustment. As you know, in 2009, those funds were essentially taken on a permanent basis from all the districts in New York, and we were able to creep some of that money back. An additional $297 million was thrown into the pot to get us, I believe it's $602 million was the total restoration of the gap elimination adjustment. So we're getting there. It's at about $1.1 billion now. Right. It was 1.7. Now we're about 1.1. We're hoping in the next year, or at the very latest in the next 2 years, to restore that completely, because again, that's direct school aid that affects the homeowners one-to-one.
You said you got money for the sewage treatment plant in Calverton. Let's talk about the drinking water situation. That kind of dovetails, I guess, right?
Sure. Regionally, there's been a significant concern regarding the nitrogen in the water and drinking water quality. Based upon the geography of the east end of Long Island, as you know, I have the North Fork on the eastern section of Suffolk County, that we have so many estuaries and such a tidal impact and significant amounts of septic systems. You could not sewer the east end. It can't happen. So we need to try and reduce and control that as best we can. And the sewage treatment plant is outdated, and we're able to get actually out of the Environmental Protection Fund that $5 million instead of general capital funding.
Okay.
So that came from the EPF to upgrade it and make it more efficient, and certainly deal with that on a larger basis. We also had, it's not in my district, but we also had an additional $2 million to extend the sewers from Bellport further east. So that's part of the problem, and it's a nice solution to be able to do that, and it's a start of a comprehensive plan that we need to implement relatively quickly.
Got about 5 weeks of the legislative session, and there's some outstanding issues out there. One of those issues is women's equality. There's going to be a press conference tomorrow concerning human trafficking, and this ties into women's equality. It's a multi-pronged, multi-component bill.
That's right.
Talk about that, if you would.
Well, interestingly enough, we did vote on that bill once so far this session, and I voted no. And it's something that is the unfortunate and ugly side of politics, because it was presented to us as a 10-point bill. The 10th point allows late-term abortion, partial birth abortion. It's specific to abortion. It also repeals a number of sections in the homicide statute, Article 125 of the penal law. And the other side continues to claim that it's just merely the codification of federal law of Roe versus Wade. Then why are we repealing every homicidal act relative to abortion in the penal law in New York? It's disingenuous. It's complete. I don't think it would ever pass the Senate, but unfortunately it comes out in the Assembly as an omnibus bill, just like the budget that we just discussed. It comes out 10 points, all or nothing. So based on that reason alone, I voted no. Now the interesting angle is, or aspect of it, is 1 through 9 we have individual bills, and last year the Senate passed the human trafficking. All of the other aspects, equal pay.
As standalone bills.
As standalone single bills. They passed the Senate. The Speaker never allowed any one of them to come to the floor. So they're going to have a press conference tomorrow and probably suggest that they're the champions of women's rights, which is shameful, because they have not allowed, they're the ones who have held up all of those bills from becoming law in New York State. Now, my conference in the Assembly has 9 standalone bills, 1 through 9, and I'm a co-sponsor of every one of them. Mm-hmm. I'd like to see them come to the floor. I'm hopeful. I don't know if they ever will, but that's the ugly side of Albany politics is they won't allow us to be the so-called champions. Meanwhile, they've been the ones holding it up all along. It's quite sad.
Your overall impressions of Albany, you're a newcomer, as you mentioned. What do you take from it here your first term?
You know, it is enjoyable. I like it. And maybe it's because my career as a litigation attorney is you're adverse to someone in the room at all points. And it's not a fist fight. It's not an angry yelling and screaming, although occasionally it gets to that point. Mm-hmm. It's trying to rationalize your position that's to the benefit of your district. So it's a very interesting process. I had a general idea. I didn't think it was as partisan as it really is, because it is quite partisan up here. But at the end of the day, we have different views than others, but their views aren't, or I wouldn't say, that, or overwhelmingly, they don't have malicious intent.
No. That
they're trying to do what they think is best. It may not be well thought out. A lot of times I'm finding when we debate these bills that the sponsors don't even know what's in their bill until we ultimately get to the bottom of it. For example, in the women's equality agenda, they seem to suggest, the proponents suggest that this isn't what we say, but you just read the language of the bill. It also allows duly licensed physicians to perform any of those acts. And in the education law, a dentist is a duly licensed physician. So as a lawyer, I look at this and say, so you're allowing dentists to perform abortions, isn't that right? Oh no, that's not the intent of the bill. I understand that, but that's what it says.
That's how it's worded,
so,
right.
Yeah, so I think that's where the rubber meets the road, is that you have poorly drafted bills, you have oftentimes well-intended legislation, but it just, in practicality and in reality, that's not what it is.
Interesting. Let's talk about the public accountability for state lawmakers, how important that is. The governor disbanded his Moreland Commission recently. Give me your overall views on that. Yes.
Well, he disbanded the Moreland Commission in exchange, I believe, from what I've seen his press releases have been, ultimately as a result of the Public Trust Act that we voted into law with the budget, which was simply enhanced penalties. That doesn't reduce the oversight. And I think as far as an overall deterrent, when you see, unfortunately, in the Assembly and in both houses, for that matter, in New York, we overwhelmingly have tremendous criminal conduct by our state lawmakers. It's 213 of us, and it's unbelievable. It's shocking. And as a former prosecutor, I think that it's that we're all educated people, and we're all people with pretty sophisticated minds when it comes to enacting legislation and understanding the nuance of the ins and outs of everyday life. So I am co-sponsoring a bill that would strip the public officials of their pensions, of their publicly funded pensions, if convicted of a felony for acts relative to their office. And that is something that I think wholeheartedly would be a deterrent, because you see oftentimes, and in recent years, the ones who are being charged and indicted and convicted of crimes are usually ones or are employees who've been in the public system for many, many, many years. And maybe they get complacent, or they get lazy, or they get piggy, or whatever it is that requires them or forces them to resort to criminal conduct. Mm-hmm. Will certainly be thought about a second time if they know that if, in the event that I am convicted of a crime for committing these acts, or of a felony, it's not even a crime. Let me clarify. It's just a felony relative to your act, to your office. Then you will lose your pension. That, I think, is a severe hammer.
That's a deterrent for sure.
The sword of Damocles will be hanging over their head. So clean up your act.
Yeah, and unfortunately, too many people have learned how to game the system, and that's what's happening.
Oh, without a doubt. And it's almost to the point where you hear some of the public comments by the accused that, well, everybody does it. This is how we do it. Well, those days need to come to an end. This state is going down the tubes financially at an alarming rate. So little things like that, Medicaid fraud, all these other issues of people gaming the system are costing us billions and billions of dollars a year. So we really need to address that immediately.
We talked about education at the top of the program, and let's discuss universal pre-K. $340 million statewide. $300 million of that amount went to New York City. Upstate New York, the rest of the state basically has to split up $40 million for pre-K.
And look, I'm not for raising taxes at all. We have so many mandates and taxes in this state, it makes your head spin. But if New York City wants universal pre-K, Mayor de Blasio suggested that New York City should pay for it. And that's, again, not thrilled about it. I don't even have universal kindergarten in my district. So now we're taking $340 million of the public funds, of our taxes, and using that to fund primarily universal pre-K, which will ultimately be daycare in New York City, because these kids are going to learn whatever they may learn, but then they're going to have a year home or a part-time kindergarten, and then they go back to first grade. So it's just, again, well-intended, absolutely misapplied, and it's just something that wasn't thought through. It's good for headlines, and certain people will say rah-rah, but at the end of the day, it's just something that we don't need at this point. We need to get our finances under control before we start creating new programs. And every single analysis and every single universal pre-K program has cost significantly more than they projected. Mm-hmm. So now what? It's another mandate. So here we go again.
That's it.
With typical New York politics, unfortunately, and I think it's going to, unfortunately, just end up costing a significant amount more than we think, and it's not going to be as beneficial as we'd hoped.
The biggest challenge facing state lawmakers from here till the end of June is what? Is it getting your fiscal house in order, the state's fiscal house in order?
Yes, and from what I see, we've only got a month and a half to go, so what I really need to think about is my local bills. This seems to be the point where you can really hone in on specifics to your district and try and clean that up. We were able to enact in the budget a reduction in setbacks, very local, kind of a hyper-local issue, where certainly in the west end of Suffolk County and even New York City for that matter, they don't realize the deer population is such a tremendous issue on the east end. Remember this? And our concern was the setbacks based on the geography of the east end. We had 500-foot setbacks from homes for archery. It's been reduced to 150. So
okay, we'll have to follow up on that next show. We're out of time.
Yeah, without a doubt.
But a quick 15 minutes, Assemblyman Anthony Palumbo. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
And thank you for joining us on this edition of Assembly Calendar. We'll see you soon. I'm Ted Flynn.